Income Tax 2020 Tax Software Example Schedule C Employees Pay Expenses. Come in, relax with Income Tax 2020. Here we are in our Lacerte tax software. You don't need the Lacerte tax software in order to follow along, although I do think they have a 30-day free trial. So if you can get access to a demo version of the 30-day free trial, it might be a good tool to practice with. We're going to be focusing in on the Form 1040 and the related Schedule C, looking specifically at payroll expense deductions, jumping back and forth from the data input to the forms to run different scenarios, the tax software making it easier to do so. Starting scenario, we got our single tax filer, Eric Smith, living in Beverly Hills 90210. We're starting off with the Schedule C income, which is flowing through to the first page of the 1040 at the $100,000 here. We then have the above the line deduction, which is related to the payroll or self-employment taxes, Social Security and Medicare, on the employer's net income, the net income in essence of the Schedule C. And we're going to be talking now about payroll taxes, meaning we're talking about W-2 income. Now the owner then paying other employees, having then responsibilities for Social Security and Medicare on the employer side of things and withholding from those employees. That's going to get us down to the adjusted gross income. We got the standard deduction, $12,400. Might have then the qualified business income deduction here. That gets us down to the taxable income of the $64,428. We're now going to be focusing in on the Schedule C. So we're going to go on over to the Schedule C here, where we're starting out with the $125,000 of the income and the $25,000 of the expenses now. And we're going to be concentrating in on the wages. So we're talking about the wages here, and we could be including then taxes, which would be the payroll taxes that could be deductible as well. We're thinking about this more from a logistical standpoint in terms of the data input now. So if you have the information from, say, a client and you're inputting that information into the tax software, then what do you have to do on this side of things? Now note, if you have the income statement, then this information that relates to the calculation of the wages and the payroll taxes should already be complete. And if it's done correctly, then of course all you got to do is take the number and plug it into this line item on the tax return. However, you might want to go a little bit more deep in order to safeguard or help in case there's any kind of problems that are going to be happening. In other words, you might want to ask the client for the payroll information, such as the W-3 and the 941s, so that you can verify that the amount that is being deducted for wages and payroll taxes matches what is being reported on the 940s, on the 941s and the W-3, because the IRS has both those things. So if the IRS has the W-3s and the 941s, and you have something different that's deducted on the Schedule C, then that might be added case for an audit. It might be just a case that there could be an error there. So it could be useful for us to then check that out and double check those numbers. As we do so, note it can also often be confusing as to what should be included in wages and what should be included in, say, taxes up here. Now note, sometimes both the payroll taxes and the wages might be included in wages down here. That might not be a big deal because you should be able to deduct both of them, but technically they should kind of be broken out between the two. And when we break them out between the two, it can be a little confusing to know what that breakout is. So we'll discuss that a little bit more in detail here so you can just be aware of that dilemma. Also note that if you're entering data for payroll, you might have questions about payroll information. And as a tax preparer, then your question will be, do you want to do payroll taxes? Are you doing bookkeeping and payroll taxes as well as tax returns? Or is your business model such that you're focused in on the tax preparation and possibly networking with other people that might be doing the bookkeeping, or other people that might be doing payroll? So you want to have those things in mind so that you can give some advice that you feel comfortable with within your realm, and then basically network with people that are outside your realm. Either way would be good. Don't think that you have to do basically everything. Payroll is kind of a specialty in and of itself. If you want to pick it up within your business model, might be good, but it also could be helpful if you stay away from it and then work with other people that specialize in that area, because then they don't see you as a threat, right? You're doing the taxes, they're doing the payroll. You can work together without basically stepping on each other's toes and refer each other. So whatever model you're using, just keep in mind that concept. So once we have this information, we might want to check this out against the 940s, the 941. So this is the basic payroll type of information. The 941s are the quarterly tax returns that will typically be filed. They have to be filed on a quarterly basis. Therefore, we should have 4 of them. And these things will basically be reporting the wages for the quarter and the amount that should be reported for Social Security and Medicare for both the employee and employer side of things. Then if we go to the W-3, this is basically a summary form of all the W-2s that would be put together. So this kind of looks like a W-2 form, but it would be a W-2 form as if all employees were kind of scrunched together into one employee. And then we can look at basically total wages that would be in box 1, Social Security wages and Medicare wages here. And then we have the Form 940, which is the federal unemployment tax, which is a year-end or annual report, which seems like it's be the same as the 941s or like summarize the 941s. And in a way it does so, but it's really focused in on another tax, that being the federal unemployment tax. So note that the 940s are focused on federal income tax that's being taken from the employees, not the amount that the employer is paying, which were calculated on the 1040, and the Social Security and Medicare, both the amount that's being taken from the employees out of their wages and the amount that the employer is paying on top of that. And then the 940 is just focusing in on the federal unemployment tax, which is a smaller federal tax typically. So that's what we have here. Now if we're looking at this in terms of the line items, we might have wages here. Now wages ideally here should be including the wages basically that were paid to the employee. So that would basically be lining up to a wage line basically on the W-3. So it may line up, if you're looking at the 3 kind of wage lines, 1, 3, and 5, it may line up most closely to line 5, because you'll recall that Social Security has a cap on it, and the wages for up here for federal taxes may have things that are reducing it, such as a retirement plan or something like that. So the most accurate component here to kind of tie out to see if what is being reported is correct might be then box 5 here, which is actually the Medicare wages. So you would think that something similar to that would be lining up to the wages that are going to be down here, reported here. Now also note that you have the taxes, payroll taxes. The payroll taxes may be broken out separately, or some software such as QuickBooks by default will often put it into one line item. So you might have it included in one line item. You might want to break them out, or because it would be better to break it out into a separate line item for the payroll taxes. But note that on the payroll taxes, when we think about the payroll taxes, this kind of mirrors the W-2. And remember that the employee was taken out of their wages, Social Security and Medicare. So although we paid Social Security and Medicare for the amount that was taken from the employees, it was really the employees in essence who paid for it. So we're not going to have payroll taxes. We're not going to break out the payroll taxes that were the employees' payroll tax. In other words, the amount in wages expense should be the full amount of the wages here, possibly the Medicare wages, even though we didn't give all those wages to the employee, because we took from the employee Social Security and Medicare, for example, to pay them to the government. So we don't break out federal income tax, Social Security, and Medicare that were taken out of the W-2 wages to break them out as payroll expense, but rather record them as employee wages and treat it as though then the employee paid those wages, even though, again, we did it as the employer. We took it from them or never gave it to them and paid it to the government because that's what we're required to do. The payroll tax side of things then would be just the employer portion of the wages. And you can get that basically from the 940s, or in essence, it would be, equivalent to, the half of it got paid by the employee, so the other half would be paid by the employer. So in other words, if you took a look at the 940 and you added up the 4 quarters of the 940 has both the employee and employer portion of the Social Security and Medicare. So the employee and the employer portion included, you want to take just the employer portion, meaning you can take the total that was paid and divide it by 2 typically, because the employer portion is what the employer had to pay over and above the actual wages to the employee. They had to pay more to the employee. So you can pick that up, or you can at least kind of double check it from taking the 941s, adding up the total for the Social Security and Medicare, and then basically dividing by 2 to just look at the employer portion, or basically taking the W-3 to get an approximation here and look at the Social Security and Medicare, and it should basically be the same because the employer matched the same amount there. So when you look at the W-3, remember, you're not looking at it as if these are the payroll taxes. This is what was taken out of the W-2 wages from the employee, but the employer matched the same amount as can be reported, as will be seen on the 941s here. And then the reason I say that's an approximation is because then you should take the 940 and also calculate and add into it the federal unemployment tax, which is called FUTA tax. It's called the FUTA tax. So we can add this to it as well, but this is usually fairly minimal. So this is not going to be the largest component of the federal income tax. So then you can kind of get an idea, a feel as to whether they filled out their payroll properly, because you can kind of match out the expenses here, which should be the wages that were paid, that includes the employee taxes, and then you can break out the employer taxes, which should be technically applied out here to the taxes line item for 23. So if you were to do the data input, then once you have that, you can then go down to the wages, and we'd say whatever the wages were, we'll say total wages were, 50,000. And then you might have the taxes up top. So I'll go to the taxes, payroll taxes, we'll say they're 5,000, right? If we had that, and then go back up, obviously I just totally made those numbers up. And so the wages then you would think would line up here. You'd say, okay, well that lines up, you would think, to like the W-3, to these lines 1, 3, and 5, maybe all 3 of them, unless they hit the cap for Social Security and unless they have some other kind of things deducting. If not, probably box 5 here. And then you would think that this line item here, you'd think that that would line up. If I was to double check that, I'd say, okay, well then, if I have the W-3, then I can say, well, that should add up to like the Social Security and Medicare on it, even though this is the employee Social Security and Medicare, because the employer should have matched it. If I have the 941s for the 4 quarters, all 4 of them, I can add up the 4 quarters here and divide by 2, because this would include the employee and employer portion divided by 2. If I divide it by 2, I should get to basically the same numbers that we got here if I added these 2 up. And then I should add to it basically the 940 information. If I don't have the 940, then it should be fairly small, the 940. So, if I'm just kind of double checking, I should be able to be in the ballpark there and kind of check that out. And that's what you would basically expect to be here. So again, if these aren't matching up, if these things are wildly different than what is reported on the 941s and the 940, then obviously something is wrong, and you want to address that because something's wrong. And 2, you want to address it for sure because, again, the IRS has that information on the payroll side and on the Schedule C side, so they're going to possibly check it. I mean, they can almost check it with a machine to verify that, and you'll have to deal with it later. Best to deal with it when you do the tax return.